All right, now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of this presentation here. We're on to the actual inductees for the Hall of Fame. How we do this, for those that haven't been here before, is we'll have a couple of presenters that will introduce each of the inductees. Then the inductee will say a few things, and then afterwards, if people want to add some thoughts, and that we'll do afterwards. So, without further ado, our first inductee this afternoon is Mr. Jim Birk. We've got a couple of people here that will be introducing him that are very instrumental in his ballooning career. First it will be Debbie Spaeth. I was trying to figure out what I'm going to say about Debbie Spaeth that hasn't already been said before. Probably the most important thing and the biggest thing for me is that she's right up here on this wall and was inducted here last year. She's got a huge, long history in ballooning. To try and summarize it, it would be nearly impossible because there's not much in ballooning that she hasn't done from when she started as a part-time job, I think is how she met Tom Shepard back when she was in high school. So she's been doing this probably as long as Leslie has, I think, right up in there. So without further ado, Ms. Debbie Spaeth.
But Eric's going first, actually. You were on the
Oh, no, I was told you were going first.
I can.
All right.
Yeah. I'm very flexible.
Okay.
I can walk around the table.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I actually don't want her to go first. She's so good at this.
Okay, I know my voice doesn't carry very far, so I'll try to stay near the mic. So first, my thanks to Jim for this honor of presenting the Jim Birk I Know. So my earliest memories of working with Jim were on the BFA Events Committee in the late 1970s. That's a long time. But I remember many hours were spent on competition rules, reviewing them, etc. As a matter of fact, the Events Committee made a special rule for Jim. If he would be the championship director for at least 3 nationals, he would have the number 10 spot on the U.S. Nationals team, or the U.S. Worlds team. Jim earned his spot and was a competitor on the U.S. team at the 1981 and 85, 85, best place. I love the allergy season. And the 85 World Championships in Battle Creek. I don't remember seeing Jim in the scoring room, so that means he was a low maintenance pilot. He didn't get the attention of the officials. And in 1991, Jim was also on the U.S. team in St. John's sur Richelieu in Quebec, Canada. So just an FYI, in 81, Jim was on page 2, which meant he was 54 out of 100. But in 85, Jim had a better event and he finished first on page 1. Thanks, Becky. He was number 27 out of 100. But in 1991, Jim was in the top 10. He finished 6th on the pilots there. So well done, Jim. As an aside, I was just going to tell you, in the 1981 Worlds, we had 6 balloon flights in a 10-day event, and there were 8 tasks. Then in 85, we had 9 flights with 11 tasks flown. And now a championship will finish with more than 30 tasks in the event. And it's usually in a 7-day event instead of a 10-day event. So things have changed over the years. Not that we have, as we look out over here, right? So Jim has been an event director for 10 U.S. national championships. For my research, Jim can claim the title of the greatest number of championships, been the director of the greatest number of U.S. national champions. That was a total of 5 years here, a year in Baton Rouge, and more recently in Longview, Texas, a 4-year stint there. One would think that he likes to spend his time in cities that have hot, steamy summer weather, but I see this as an example of his dedication to competition ballooning. Jim. Okay, there we go. Jim supported events that Tom Shepard and I ran for many years. He was a competitor at the Great Wisconsin Dells Balloon Rally. This was an event many called equal to the U.S. Nationals in its competitive spirit. And Jim was the 1985 champion of the Wisconsin Dells event. Jim was also one of our staff for the 1988 Kodak Great American Balloon Fest, honoring the 100th anniversary of the snapshot. That changed something, didn't it? Traveling with 100 pilots, 400 crew, and 25 officials over 2 weeks in windy and rainy conditions is a real test for everyone. But it was a fun event, and at the end of the week, we were all still friends, after 2 weeks. Back as far back as the 1980s, I've also been an official on Jim's staff when he was the event director. I was jury many times, but also scoring officer. I've always remembered Jim helping me finish calculations. Oh, that's making me cry, Jim. I cry at weddings of people I don't even know, so you just gotta deal with it. That's right, a box of Kleenex out there. I'm trying to keep the box to a minimum. So Jim helped me finish the calculations and scoring for an elbow task in the late evening of an event in Barrie, Ontario, Canada. We teamed up and got the results posted and even got finished before midnight. And you have to remember that that was in the days before computers, so it was hand calculators for computing angles and areas, so that was a pretty good deal. Jim and I also share a love of the people of Saga, Japan. Our very good friend Masashi Kikuta was looking for a foreign pilot to fly one of the Japanese balloons at the 1994 Saga Fiesta. Tom and I suggested Jim, and like most of us, that experience led to Jim having 25 plus years of friendship with the pilots and crew in Saga. Jim also reminded me that he participated as a safety officer, and I didn't remember that myself, but he said he shared a really good week with John Sachs, another wonderful balloonist from Belgium. In all the stories and details I uncovered or shared, the common threads were family, most important, friends, long and loyal list, balloon competition that's challenging, fair, and interesting for pilots and officials, and nurturing the next generation of pilots and officials to follow and continue our steps, all important to Jim. I'm not even to the part that I always broke up when I practiced. All right. We've also shared some misadventures over the years. Jim's friend Geppetto sent me a lovely note and a commemorative black ball, which I still cherish, Jim. That was a result of an international kerfuffle, as I call it, over some ballooning in Puerto Rico. But hey, as I said, I still have it. But Jim can rest easy in his chair. I did not pull anything from the Tom Shepard file labeled Jim Birk. And Mary Jo, you'll be happy to know that there were no singed edges and ashes to drop from letters that were hot topics over the years. Jim did remind us that a letter that Tom sent to him years ago, that Tom actually singed the edges of. When he pulled it out of the envelope, Mary Jo was not happy that the dust went everywhere. I left all those in the file. True story, right, Jim? Yep. I do have to tell one story that Tom Shepard would have shared today. Jim and Tom were competitors flying at a balloon event that used observers. I was flying with Tom, and I don't remember if we had our observer on board, but I do remember that Jim was flying parallel to us for quite some time. Then as Tom corrected our height to reach the target, Jim was obviously on a different trajectory, making no attempt to follow the same line to the location of the target. We flew on and did our thing, but I honestly don't remember if we did better or worse. Oh, I don't remember how we did, but I know we did better than Jim. So it turned out Jim was taking local direction from his observer, and unfortunately for Jim, the observer said, "Follow this road, you're going to be right there." And that was where he was parallel to us. And then when he reached the point where the road turned to the right, the observer said, "Now we're over that point, turn to the right." And I understand Jim was not pleased that day. These stories all combined to create the great memories and blood, sweat, tears, and love of ballooning that went into the years. This is the part that is. Okay. I'd like to close with the following that I found in the 2009 U.S. Nationals program, written by Maury Sullivan. He was the event director. Maury wrote, "My first exposure to competition ballooning was the burly Jim Birk, who took no prisoners, and Tom Shepard, formerly with the Royal Navy, who started meetings by blowing this ear-piercing whistle to get everyone's attention. I became good friends with both Mr. Birk and Mr. Shepard, and both taught me much about competition ballooning. Forget their seemingly gruff exterior. The teddy bear personalities always came through, and were demonstrated in their commitment to the sport, the pilots they directed, and the organizations they served. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to share this moment with you, and to see Jim's plaque joining his friends on the wall."
And now I'd like to have Mr. Eric Farman come up and say a few words for me.
Now it's your turn.
I don't think we totally screwed up my thing.
Does it help when you get to go first versus second?
Huh? Down or off, yeah. But I can't see. So, yeah, that's fine.
Leave it, this one on.
Yeah.
Okay.
See what happens. Okay, I might have a little different. I'm going to stand in front of this so I can see the slides because it says slide 1, slide 2, but I don't know what they want.
You might want to stand by the mic.
Here, so let's move the mic up here.
Okay. So when Jim contacted me and honored me with the ability to introduce him at this ceremony, I was mortified actually, and I'm wondering out of a few dozen people who would have been equally as able to do this job, I again was honored, just like I was honored when Jim asked me to come to Indianola. I had been coming to Indianola anyway, but come to Indianola to be his Fiesta chairman or event director in the 81 national championships. And I did that for him in 81 and 82, but we had met each other quite a bit before that. But in any time, to lead off this slide, because it was pretty important in my life, and I gotta hope that Jim Birk was responsible for assigning me this crew in 83 when I stepped down as the Fiesta event chairman and introduced Mr. Peanut, or as Bill Bussey would call it, Goober, to the Indianola people, and instead pretty much, started the Mr. Peanut thing. But so it was either my replacement Gary King or Jim Birk or both assigned me this crew. So let's see if we can bring this up. There. Now, this is right in front of Simpson College dormitory, of course. That's Mr. Peanut Basket, and I'm diligently putting things together as best I can, distracted by my assigned crew. And I really might add that they were, for 3 days, they were virtually untrainable. But it was an absolute pleasure to watch them pack up Mr. Peanut. Anyway, and I show this also because you can add lots of things to Jim's character. One thing is he was a great fun guy, and among all his seriousness and all the words that Jim has about being so gruff and all that kind of stuff, he was far from it. But he did play that role pretty good. So, slide number 2. There's the Jim Birk we all know and love. And I got to add at this point, because this is not my photograph, and a number of the photographs that I've picked out here over, I was assigned this task like 3 months ago, and I put it together the last 3 days. But I had to go through like 5,000 photographs, and I found a great deal of them, and a great deal of them were done by Tom Roberts, the late Tom Roberts, who was a great photographer of Indianola ballooning, among others, I believe. But this is one of his photographs, and I'm not going to say every one that's his, but you can probably tell. But there's the Jim Birk in 1981 or 2. I'm not sure. I know exactly what he's thinking right there, because that's exactly what's happened. You'll see another slide here after a bit that has a little bit to do with that. But my early life with Jim Birk is we only live about 45 minutes apart. I'm in Toledo and he's in Defiance, and he's been there ever since I've known him. And a few things that I jotted down is that was the inability for balloonists to connect back then, except at events, because we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have, we couldn't find each other. We couldn't. I had a hard time even finding out somebody would sell me a balloon when I decided to buy my first balloon. So we connected, and mostly because early on, because I got my designated pilot examiner and started examining pilots in the late 70s, and Jim would send me students. And then we got up a social relationship, because he'd come crew, of course, and try to make sure his students passed. And one thing I remember about his students is that they were all very well prepared, probably far more in the flying part of it than they were in the academic part of it. And you could tell that he had a great gift of doing that and working with and managing people that had a desire to listen and remember and being told only once. Other than that, he didn't have a lot of truck for people who didn't listen and follow directions. But he was pretty gentle about it. I remember another little quirk of Jim's. We would meet in between, there was a dive bar in between Maumee and Harrisburg. We go there for all you can eat frog legs and bourbon. Here's another tidbit. I asked my wife Sally, you know, something she could remember about the Birks. And we were invited to the Birk household for dinner, first time ever, and you know, couples having dinner, and we were all pretty young. And I remember a lot of small talk, which Jim's not particularly good at. And they got done with dinner, and Jim went into the living room and promptly sat in his easy chair and fell asleep. And of course, Mary Jo was pretty mortified for a few moments, and then it was just like, that's just Jim. He's tired. And I think most of his life he's tired. I mean, he goes all the time. I don't know how he goes day in, day out. When you think balloonists at a national competition get tired, how about the balloon meister? Maybe 2-3 hours max every night with a little bourbon before you go to bed. It was a great...
Bourbon when you get up?
Yeah. Sally reminded me of the jewelry that Jim made for her, out of balloon jewelry with a little diamond on it, made out of gold. He was quite a little jeweler and enjoyed doing that as a hobby and woodworking at the infamous Birk Lake facility. So things maybe you didn't know about Jim Birk that he kept busy at, because he always kept busy. I was always impressed by one thing about Jim's professorial days at Defiance College, and that he took his students down to, was it Big Bend down in the Rio Grande, every year to actually experience the things that he was teaching in the class. And so that says a lot about what Jim did for the rest of his life. He was a great mentor, and he taught what he knew well, and he demonstrated what he knew well. I'll get to that in a little bit, but I also found a great slide here, and I didn't want to leave him alone, but it's a great picture of Nick. And Nick was Jim's assistant from '81 and '82, I think, maybe longer. You know, dates are hard to get, but what a great team that was for running championship events, and a neat guy. So I'll move on from there. Slide 4. This is myself and Jim. I can't place where we were. Fort Wayne or someplace local, I think. I think that's my blazer. I have no idea what we were doing. And of course, I love this picture because one of the things when he got to Indianola is we had a great deal of red areas to contend with. And one of the masters of a great manager is that they know how to pick people. And Jim, first thing he did was pick and manage a great staff of rural relations people who would manage these red areas. And I don't know how many red areas went off the map during the tenure of Jim Birk running the Nationals in Indianola, but was considerable because of the relationship he had with the rural relations people. And you can see the red on the map there in the background. I have a comment here. If you don't know the rules in the rule book, then don't bother asking questions. Just take time to explain and slow down the briefing. That was perfect, Jim Birk. If you were at that level of competition, which Jim always was at that level of competition, then you better know the rules. And you know, maybe I'll have time to talk to you later, but don't slow down the briefing. And Jim was very prompt on starting the briefing exactly on time. I knew this would happen. I couldn't get these saves properly.
Yeah.
Go get it turned around.
For some reason, I picked up these two slides. It's Nick and a pie ball and some of the rural relations staff, and I think maybe scoring, but mostly rural relations, and then another one. Oops, wait a minute. Back. Sorry. It was part of the package, I should have done. And of course, there's Nick again with a pie ball. So evidently, Nick was it's at least and more the chief pie ball launcher. And of course, we had no GPSs or anything, and it was great that you brought out that compass rose in the string, because it's true, it's still in use, and he largely is not a big fan of heavy technology, but has rolled with the punches that way as best he can. But he's a seat of the pants type flyer, as proven by competing considerably in a big fat balloon. This was the Kroger balloon. And don't think Jim's out of the game with these racers when he was flying a big fat balloon, because he wasn't. He competed very heavily all his life, which added to the respect that competitors and the staff had for him as a balloonist, because he was never, rarely at the tail end of competition. He was in the game all the time, even while he was doing all the officiating. Again, wondering why he ever slept. I have a comment here. If you don't know how to read a map or a compass or a weather brief, and then you're beyond your level of competition, you should not jeopardize or impede the other competitors. I don't know when he made that statement. It came in there somewhere. Jim's briefings were not a democracy. There was only one balloon meister who accepted full responsibility if any mistakes were made. From the staff to the rural relations or anything, he was the top dog and he took blame for it. So he was a master at that. Jim had a great knack for delivering the commands of a general so that everyone was happy to follow. And so there was, I made a comment that, maybe out of order, but there were very few protests in the Jim Birk race. The rules were set up properly, the tasks were set up properly, the staff knew what they were doing, and there was rarely any question as to whether something was wrong with the event. So it was a testament to Jim's ability as a balloonmeister that was true. Okay. Now we're getting into the meat of competition. I think this is I'm out of order a little bit. But, I got a comment here about whenever we were together, he needed to check out local pawn shops to see what bargains could be found for firearms. Jim was big on buying shotguns and things on the way. And so we always had to stop at pawn shops. I would add that at the Birk Lake event every year, Jim flew a balloon a lot better than shooting, however. But those events were also very good as a regular litany of adult games and adult beverages. Anyway, invitation to be balloon meister at the Nationals in Indianola, Jim's first 2 years, and assisted to Gary King later on. Although I had officiated some small events in the Toledo area that was beginning to be able to seriously run sanctioned competition at a higher level for me for quite a number of events. And so under Jim's tutelage and instruction, I went on to run a lot of events myself, and I got to hand that to Jim to give me the ability to know how to do that. At the Nationals here, and one of the great things that happened at the Nationals, which made it a particularly interesting event, more so than others, I believe, is it took me about 100 Fiesta pilots and 100 competitors. There was a waiting list for people to get in the Nationals back then. And we had to manage keeping the airspace for those two huge sets of balloons separated. And it took quite a piece of coordination to do that, but we seemed to pull it off okay. And there were some pretty successful events that happened. And rarely did we get any protests from the competitors because we were running into their airspace with all these other balloons. They were out at Pickard Park, we were here in town, and and we ran a lot of fun events. Well, I've got a comment here. Jim's teaching skills were certainly well demonstrated over the years, as he unselfishly tutored and brought along entire generations of hot air balloon officials of all positions. From people who excelled as balloon meisters, as scoring officials, as landowner relations, as safety officer, observers, and on and on. He patiently taught them, well, sometimes not. Patiently taught them their craft and allowed others to teach with the same result. So slides 9, 10, 11. Dealing with the unexpected. So this is here again here in Indianola, and I picked most of the Indianola stuff because that's where we're at right now. And there was a great task set up with it. You can see the target there in the 100 inch pigs. I think we knew, or he knew, that there were pigs somewhere, but they let them out or something. But what we didn't realize is that pigs really like markers. And so there was quite a scramble to score that event properly. So the very next day at the briefing, I don't know how people do this so quickly, but the very next day at the briefing, all the officials had official making bacon t-shirts. Okay, let's see here. All right, now we're getting some pretty famous stuff. Here's a great shot of Mr. Birk and his favorite staff, which was always rural relations. We had a great time with those folks, and they helped us. Look around there. Sorry. They helped us put on great events all the time, and I'm sure that's probably true here in Indianola to this day, and why you're able to carry on the events that you do. So there's Jim Coldencourt with some rural relations guys. I'd like to see all of them again. Okay, this is entitled "The Beginning of the Bridge Too Far." And I don't remember quite all the details of this task, but I remember the name connotates the fact that it was now quickly in the area under Jim of multiple tasks and multiple long-range tasks, where not only the skills of the pilot were done on a set of a micro level and a micrometeorology level to a target, but some pretty long-range navigation and fuel consumption problems that they had to work out. And unfortunately, this was too far for that fuel calculation. It slowed down. And it was such a wonderful target. You can see Jim is so tickled that the balloon it just didn't happen, and it was a pretty complex target. You can see there was toilet paper lined up. We had real technology on the side of the road. And here's a little better shot of the bridge too far. And you can see the toilet paper outline. Anything inside the toilet paper was legal. But I don't think we got a single marker, did we, Jim? No.
We did it the next day, though.
Yeah. We waited. That bridge was down in sort of a gully, and the reason they had to navigate so well is they were flying topographical marks. There were no GPS, so you really had to fly. You had to study a map to get there. And the only time we would see a balloon is all of a sudden it'd appear over the trees where we had. Oh, there he is. But they didn't appear.
Eric, there was a big line of trees on the south side of that road.
Yes.
And you could not see the
bridge
until you got
absolutely had to navigate to that target.
The hidden target.
Yeah, and no GPS. So it was and I love this photograph for a number of different reasons. This is like one of Tom Roberts' most classic photographs of competition here in Indianola. Not only is the target there and the little measuring tape and the scoring staff watching the balloons go over, but on the approach there is the first big benefactor of this museum, Leo Eisenberg and the gumball. And bless him for what he did to bootstrap the finances of this building. So I love that shot. And here's Jim Beale going at one of Jim's Indianola diabolical targets, which was the boat And then the rest, I think, was a scoring area outside the pond. And it looks like Jim pretty much got it made now. And Jim, of course, is depicted in his balloon, and he did a great deal of the artwork for the BFA over the years. Well, this is great. This is what occurred this morning here in Yanoa. You can see the stars out. This is probably, what, 6:30 in the morning? No, earlier than that, maybe 5:30, 5:45 in the morning. We're ready to conduct a briefing, and you can see the stars out. And I don't know if you've noticed that red flag, which was the signaling system to go or no go or whatever. And it's doing probably about 25 knots. And that's when the term relative, I don't know if it's a Dr. West scientific term, or I never did learn that, but low-level nocturnal jet. We always loved that terminology. But that one came down right down to the ground right away, versus this morning that was going to come down later. It'll take a lot of time. Of course, the only time that we really participated in the event was a pickup truck, full contest for pickup trucks. So the event staff all got T-shirts that says, "The pickup is mine." And there's a very young Gary Britton right there. Jim, I don't know if you know about Jim, but he hates helicopters. And and rightfully so, I'm not fond of them either, but somebody in Des Moines, I believe, donated this helicopter to our effort, the competition effort, and it was a Hughes 500. And of course he said, "Mikey, you do it." And so I would go out in this helicopter, and he would sometimes, we go out and look for targets and problem areas and chase down issues. And it was a great contribution, but I think it was only used 1 year, but it was great fun. And of course, you'd be remiss in Jim's life to not mention these two people. And what a great couple they were to Indianola ballooning, and to Jim in particular. And in fact, Jim had such a tight relationship with Burl and Jackie Woodyard that he called them Mom and Dad. And spent a great deal of time, not even in the ballooning context, and visited them and stayed at their home here in Indianola. And Burl was the head of rural relations and was instrumental in such a great effort of keeping things calm here in the countryside of Indianola. And it was just wonderful with all those balloons in the background and the two of them. Sadly, we missed them both. I don't know where this was. Was this at your house, maybe? But I don't remember Bruce Bussey ever being there. But steak and corn in the cob, that's an Iowa thing pretty much, but there's both Nick and Jim, no doubt post-task. You recognize that at all? Here's a great photograph. Talk about Class A and testosterone. I think Bill Bussey organized this, and we all got together at Rockingham in South Carolina and drove 600 horsepower NASCARs for 3 days, trying to pass each other and exceed. And Buddy Bombard at school, and I think he was pretty mortified and terrified at the end of this training class because he didn't know what kind of a class he got. I've got a list of all the names that are in this picture, but it was a great time. We had fun. So there was a lot more to competitive ballooning in Jim Birk than just hot air. And this is my last photograph here. Jim is this is at Winterfest Toledo, probably in the late 80s maybe, and flying Kroger and getting prepared for a VFR competition task. It was snow and banshees, but we still pulled off the task. I think we declared it was special VFR, and off we went. So, see if I missed anything. The rest of it I did pretty much off the top of my head. So, I was honored to be on Jim's list to speak on his behalf. I asked him today, I said, why did you pick me? Did you run out of names or something? And he said, no, it's because we've been such great friends for some 45 years in the ballooning community and contributed a lot to each other's lives. And so, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's absolute certainty that you should be on this wall in the world of ballooning, so thank you.
Thanks, Eric. There's one person that really wanted to be here but couldn't be here because he's in Texas finishing up a balloon race. That race that wouldn't probably be what it is today if it wasn't for Jim Birk. But Dr. Bill Bussey called me earlier this week, or at the beginning of last week, and he said, you know, there's so much that I want to be able to say about Birk. He said, most of it I can say in public. But he said, if there's one sentence that I want everybody at the induction to know about Jim Birk, is that he's a giver. And he's worked and volunteered so much to the balloon community and does nothing but give back and takes very little. And those of you that know Jim knows that he's a giver. And for Dr. Bill to say that, you know that it's true. So it's my distinct pleasure and honor to induct into the National Ballooning Hall of Fame Mr. Jim Birk. The floor is yours, my friend.
I don't want to take too much time.
Yeah. Should come out.
Yeah, it comes.
I don't need a break.
No, Becky jammed it in here. So.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Still work?
Still works.
All right.
First of all, I appreciate the committee making the decision to honor me, and for Debbie and Eric for the presentation. It's kind of interesting that I grew up basically hating aviation. When I was 12 years old, I was the flag guy for the crop duster that was planting rye in my father's corn. And I stood at the end with a 20-foot cane pole and a flag on the end, and that guy would come down through there and bombard me with rye seed. And then I'd have to run to the next row where the rye seed stopped, and he'd come back and do it again. And a lot of times that guy dumped extra rye. No, he didn't. I'd go home with rye in my hair, rye in my coat. And every night at 6 o'clock when I'd put the cows on the north pasture, a DC-3 would fly by. It was a mail plane. Every night at 6 o'clock. Except in bad weather because they were flying US-31. That's the only way they knew how to get from South Bend in and out. Then, when I was 16, my mother, who was always trying to get me a job, convinced the colonel's wife at Strategic Air Command Base that I was really interested in aviation. The reason was that we had a small farm, and when I would go to school, the rich farm kids would say they'd farm 500 acres in 30 minutes. And all the small farm kids, we didn't have big tractors, and of course they didn't farm 500 acres in 30 minutes either. So I would get these books, Jane's Military Aircraft. And I would memorize all the aircraft and all the speeds. So when they would start this BS, I'd say, you guys know that the Super Sabre will do 790 mile an hour? And they wouldn't say anything. And then we talk about basketball. That's what I want to talk about anyway. So, anyway, the colonel set up a ride for me in a KC-97 to go on a refueling mission when I was 16. I was the most hated kid on the crew. I had to get an escort onto the base. A guy escorted me to the plane. A guy put me in a parachute. I was the only one wearing one. Everybody else, theirs were hung up. I asked the captain where we were going. He said south. There weren't any windows. And pretty soon we took off. Took forever. That thing lumbered and banged around. Pretty soon I heard they found a B-47 and we're going to pump fuel. Then the pump started and I thought it was falling apart. And then I heard the B-47 pilot say, thanks for the fuel, thanks for the gas, see you guys. I never saw him. I assumed he was back there. Then I asked the pilot, I said, where are we going? He said, north. When we got there, one guy led me off the plane, led me to my car, told me it's 15 mile an hour speed limit, stop at the gate and see the guard. Thank you, Mom. And I would have never been in ballooning had it not been for a geology professor that was always scamming the system at Ball State University. I was a history major, but I was running out of things to do. And so 3 years in, I had my degree and had taken some ancillary courses in earth science. And Henry Kane said, do you know there's a loophole in Ball State's rules that you can take an overload and not get charged for it? He says, here's the way you do it. Well, Henry was always a little questionable about some things, but I thought, what the heck, try it. So I got a second degree in earth sciences. That led me to go to Defiance College. Defiance College had a balloon program. I took a balloon ride on an interview. I would have never taught at Defiance College, but I liked the balloon. So I took a job, $8,400 a year as a professor. 75, I bought my own balloon. Got hooked up with Tom Shepard, who always blamed me for moving X's at targets when he was involved in the balloon race. One time he threw it a crosswalk. Thought that was the X. Then because he was a Brit, and that upset me when he was running the Nationals. And then he had a safety officer by the name of Thorne. He was also a Brit, and that upset me. He wore shorts all the time. And Tom and I got to be good friends, and we got on the same events committee. And so in 1981, I got a call, 11:30 at night. My wife said, who's calling 11:30 at night? It was Al Desmond and Sid Cutter. And they were at the board meeting in Phoenix. And Al said, we want you to be the balloonmeister at the Nationals. I'd never run a Nationals balloon event. I'd run a 26 balloon event out of a zoo in Fort Wayne. He said, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but Al said, remember the first Nationals, they had clerk of course, Steve Langjar, stood up on the balcony and yelled out the task. Well, after Tom, there were some good balloon meisters and some bad balloon meisters, but what upset Al most was the balloon meisters of California had an earring. And I know that's what it was, because Al told me one time, secretly, that's what it was. And he said, I said, look, call me tomorrow. I can't make a decision like this, call me tomorrow. He said, I'll call you in 45 minutes. So So I said to Mary Jo, I said, what the hell do I do? You know, it's Al and Sid. Who tells Sid Cutter and Al Desmond no? So I called back and I said, here's the deal. I'll do it for 3 years because the first year I'm going to get fired. And he said, okay, it's a deal. I called Eric Barnum, who was the only other fool that I knew that could take this job as the assistant. Had been my good friend forever. We flew out here in a King Air, landed at Laverty's the second time. The first time was a practice run. The second time, if we'd had a tail hook, we'd have pulled the fence clear across Laverty's strip. Guy's name that was flying the thing was Bill David, because then Eric's eyes were not good enough to fly, he said. Although we missed the fence and Eric was up there, so I don't know who was watching the fence. What we found is this: great local organization. 4 guys, Del Johnson, Steve Pfeiffer, Roger Woodard, Gary Noble, and an old man with a gruff voice, Burl Woodard. And we set about trying to increase the number of tasks at the Nationals, increase the quality of the task, and bring on additional people that could learn the job. And my dad had always said one thing: surround yourself with people smarter than you. In my case, occasionally it wouldn't have been too bad. I wouldn't have had trouble finding them either. But that was what we did. Gary King came on after that. Nick saw him after that. Dick Rudloff. On and on. I got great staff people. They're all smarter than I am. Great scoring people. But I owe this privilege and sport that's been a lot in my life, and it's taken a lot of my life, to my family. Great 4 daughters, great wife. And the people that have assisted in all these years making this sport a success. My dad had 2 things to say. You can't make old friends. You can't. And you have to leave something behind. I hope I've done that. Thank you.